If there was one game in the FNAF franchise that has left theorists befuddled long after its release, it would no doubt be FNAF 4, something I believe Scott Cawthon had in mind when writing Five Nights at Freddy's The Twisted Ones. A direct sequel to the Silver Ice novel that released a year and a half prior, The Twisted Ones exists outside the game's universe. However, just as the Silver Ice gave us a proper introduction to William Afton, the man behind the slaughter, nearly a year before the games would drop his name.
With all due respect, those aren't the design choices we were curious about, Mr. Afton.
As well as Henry, who we've been theorising is the desk man from FNAF World, The Twisted Ones is vital to understanding the Nightmare Animatronics ancestor location, which potentially solves some of the secrets I just couldn't answer in the last episode. My name is Jaffa and welcome back to FNAF Simplified, the ironically named series where we go game by game to solve the lore. As always, we can only use the information that was available when the game, or in this case book, released. I mean, it's 2017, fidget spinners are the greatest thing and Adventure Time is still running. The Twisted Ones picks up 1 year after the event of the Silver Ice, with Charlie and Jessica attending college, Charlie taking a robotics class. In this class we learn from Dr. Treadwell, Charlie's teacher, how the mind perceives the world, which will be very important later on. Your eyes deceive you every day, filling in the blanks for you in a world of sensory overload. An image of dizzying geometric detail lit up the canvas screen behind her. When I say sensory overload, I mean that quite literally. At every moment, your senses are receiving far more information than they can process all at once, and your mind is forced to choose which signals to pay attention to. It does that based on your experiences, and your expectation of what is normal. The things we are familiar with are the things we can, for the most part, ignore. We see this most easily with olfactory fatigue. Your nose ceases to perceive a smell when you've been around it for a while. You may be quite thankful for this phenomenon, depending on the habits of your roommates. The class tittered dutifully, then became quiet as the image of another multicoloured design flashed onto the screen. The professor gave a hint of a smile and continued. Your mind creates motion when there is none. It fills in colours and trajectories based on what you've seen before, and calculates what you should be seeing now. Another image flashed onto the overhead screen. If your mind didn't do this, then simply walking outside and seeing a tree would consume all your mental energy, leaving no resources to do anything else. In order for you to function in the world, your mind fills in the spaces of that tree with its own leaves and branches. 100 pencils scribbled all at once, filling the lecture hall with a sound like scurrying mice. It's why when you enter a house for the first time you experience a moment of dizziness. Your mind is taking in more than usual. It's drawing a floor plan, creating a palette of colours, and saving an inventory of images to draw on later, so you don't have to go through that exhausting intake every single time. The next time you enter that same house, you'll already know where you are. Throughout the class, Charlie absent-mindedly draws rectangles in her book and starts thinking about the strange dreams that have been plaguing her since her 18th birthday, where the previous dream would melt away and she would suddenly feel Sammy's presence. We also learned that over the summer, Aunt Jen and Charlie had a fight about Charlie returning to Hurricane, with them not being on talking terms at the moment. In their dorm room, Charlie shows Jessica an artificial intelligence project she's been working on, 2 blank, crude mechanical faces which are learning to have rudimentary conversation with each other, and people wearing a small earpiece Charlie made that makes the heads register the wearer as one of them. Jessica, creeped out by the AI heads, changes the topic to the decapitated head of Theodore, the robotic bunny Charlie's father Henry had made Charlie, and Charlie had since taken apart to better understand him. Charlie then goes to see John, who she hasn't seen since the event of the Silver Ice. He informs her that Henry's house has been destroyed in a recent storm, and awkwardly asks her out. She agrees, and as she heads to class, Clay Burke, her friend Carlton's dad and chief of police, stops her. He explains that a body has been found and he needs her to take a look. Once they arrive at the crime scene, a field of cows in the middle of nowhere, Charlie quickly identifies the man's wounds as those caused by a springlock failure. They note that whilst the man had indeed been killed by a springlock failure, there's no sign of a suit, implying that perhaps he hadn't been wearing it of his own accord. On the car ride back to campus, Clay tells Charlie that in the aftermath of William Afton's death, Freddy's has been cleared out, however they hadn't been able to locate Afton's corpse. Furthermore, they had found traces of fake blood in the dining room where Afton had been springlocked, and that Animatronics seemed lifeless. Whilst on a date with John, Charlie starts thinking more about the springlock victim, realising that the wounds were larger and spaced further apart than had it been a Fredbear's family diner suit, speculating that this suit would likely be around 7 feet tall. The next morning, Jessica and Charlie go back to Freddy's, which, true to Clay's words, is empty and in complete disrepair. Jessica notices a trail of blood and scratch marks leading up to Pirate's Cove. Opening up a small hatch inside, they find the spring Bonnie suit with Afton's corpse. Now, this is where I would like to mention perhaps one of the only changes made to the graphic novel that I actually prefer over the original source material, where they altered the scene so Springtrap had been stuck inside a closet as opposed to a small storage hatch. From what I understand, storage hatches are usually found in vehicles such as boats and are rather small, too small to shove a human in a 7-foot tall animatronic suit in. So while I'm not a massive fan of some changes, such as Jessica now being blonde despite being a brunette originally, and certain animatronic designs changing drastically, some of which we'll be getting to later in the video, this change is actually really good and makes way more sense.
Good job!
Later on, Charlie decides to go to her old house to check the damage done by the storm, but stops after spotting vultures circling in a field. The previous victim in mind, she checks the field, finding a woman with the same Springlock wounds who bears a striking resemblance to Charlie. After calling Clay, she goes to the woman's house, finding 3 grave-like holes in her backyard. She walks briskly through the unkempt grass that bordered the side of the house. When she reached the backyard, she stopped dead. Before her were 3 huge holes in the ground, longer than they were wide. They looked like graves, but at a second glance they were too messy, their outlines poorly defined. Charlie walked around them in a circle. They were lined up next to one another, and they were shallow, but the dirt at the bottom was loose. Charlie grabbed the stick off the ground and poked it into the middle hole. It went in almost a foot before it was stopped by denser soil. The dirt dug out of them was strewn messily all around. Whoever dug the holes had carelessly tossed it everywhere, not bothering to pile it up. We have another date scene with Chan and Charlie, however this time Charlie is a lot more anxious and shaken from finding another victim and grave-like holes in their backyard. After suffering a panic attack in the bathroom, Charlie decides she wants to go back to her father's house, concluding that the new Springlock animatronics must have come from there. She and John gingerly make their way inside the house, careful of the damage caused by the storm. After searching around, Charlie has a breakdown, confessing to John that she didn't come to the house for closure as she had allowed him to assume, that she was really here because of the 2 Springlock victims and the dreams that she's been having of Sammy. Quote from page 119. All I can think about is Sammy. I feel him. Right now I can feel him in this place, but he's cut off. It doesn't even make sense. He died before my father and I moved here, but I know I'm here for a reason. There's something that I'm supposed to find. It's all connected, but I don't know how. Maybe something to do with doors? I don't know. Going to comfort Charlie, John spots a hidden room partially revealed through the damage under Charlie's bedroom. Going to investigate it, they find 3 holes identical to the one in Tracy Horton's yard. Inexplicably, Charlie is drawn to one of the walls, which after moving close to investigate, she can faintly hear movement behind. Before she can investigate further, John calls her back to the graves. The creature had no fur, and its face was smooth. It had a short muzzle and oval ears sticking out from the sides of its head. It had the general appearance of an animal's head, though much larger than the animatronic animals from Freddy's. Charlie couldn't guess what kind of animal it was supposed to be. Running down the centre of its face was a long, straight split, exposing wires and a line of metal frame. A thick plastic material was stuck to the face in large patches, maybe it had been encased in it at some point. Upon closer examination, they find one half of Foxy's skull has been crushed with some other casing missing, exposing the damaged wiring beneath. Examining the circuitry, Charlie notes that whilst it looks like Henry's handiwork, it seems someone else had a hand in making the animatronic, with much of its inner workings looking unfamiliar. She also adds that the tech is much older, possibly being built earlier on. As they go to leave, Foxy activates, morphing into a monstrous version of himself and grabbing a hold of Charlie and dragging her closer, attempting to shove her into his chest cavity. John manages to decapitate Twisted Foxy before it can fully capture Charlie, inadvertently setting off some of the Springlocks as he does so. With Foxy decommissioned, Charlie starts digging around Twisted Foxy's chest cavity, finding a small disc around the size of a dime, or just shy of 18mm. She flips a small switch on the back of the disc, Twisted Fox's deactivated body returning to its original inorganic state. The book later explains how the illusion discs work properly, but for now, the general concept of the disc is that whilst activated, it warps your perception of an object, making for example a broken down and aggressive robotic fox look monstrous and almost lifelike. Its artificial skin took on a luminescence, and its movements were fluid and sure. Its casing suddenly appeared to have skin and fur, though they were blurry, flickering like a trick of the light. Charlie and John head back to Charlie's dorm to find a similar disc she had found when she had previously gone back to the house to fetch Theodore and strip the house for parts. Sure enough, the discs are identical, apart from the disc Charlie had found with Theodore having a diagnostic tool plugged in, as well as the inscription Afton Robotics LLC, which if you're familiar with Sister Location, you may recall is William Afton's company, the one who built the Funtime Animatronics and seemingly Chica's Party World. Charlie and John also recognise Afton's name, seeing he was one of the co-owners of Freddy's, alongside Charlie's father. Discussing the Springlock Murders, they head outside to get a map from Charlie's car. Placing it on the hood, they start plotting the locations of the murders on the map. Jessica arriving and joining them, Charlie filling her in on the Twisted Foxy they had unearthed. After plotting out the locations starting from Henry's house, they realise the pattern. The animatronics are going in a straight line across the map in 3-mile increments, burying themselves during the day, with their final destination seemingly being Charlie's dorm. Having a good idea of where the animatronics will strike next, the trio head to a rundown apartment complex, which after some searching, they find a large patch of discoloured dirt with deep grooves leading up to it. After a little digging, they uncover the animatronic buried beneath, Twisted Freddy. Charlie instructs John and Jessica to go to a gas station to call Clay while she kept watch over the Twisted Freddy to ensure it doesn't get activated. When Clay arrives, they inform him about the Twisted Animatronics, showing him the partially uncovered Freddy. Clay evacuates the apartment under the story that there's a gas leak before leading Charlie, John and Jessica to his car. Awaiting nightfall when they theorize the Twisted Animatronics will activate, Charlie examines the illusion disc some more. It changes our perception of what they look like, Charlie corrected. How? Jessica seems captivated. I'm not sure yet, but maybe we can find out. Charlie dug her nail into the groove and pulled the switch. Ugh, I can hear it already. It's very high pitched. Charlie was busy turning small knobs on the handheld display, trying to get a readout from the device. It gets into your head. John rubbed his forehead. This morning it almost made me sick. Of course, Charlie whispered, it gets in your head. What? Jessica turned towards her. These readings looked nonsensical at first. I thought something was wrong. And? John said impatiently when Charlie suddenly went silent. In class, we learned that when the brain is overstimulated, it fills in the gaps for you. So say you pass a red hexagonal sign on the road and someone asks you what words were on it. You'd say stop, and you'd imagine that you saw it. You'd be able to picture that stop sign the way it should have been. That is, of course, if you were properly distracted and didn't notice an obviously blank sign. This thing distracts us. Somehow it makes our brains fill in the blanks with previous experiences, the things that we think we should be seeing. How does it do that? What's in the actual signal? John glanced back again, only half listening. It's a pattern, sort of. Charlie leaned back, letting her arms relax, the device cradled in her hands. The disc emits 5 sound waves that continuously vary in frequency. First they match one another, then they don't. They go in and out of harmony, always on the edge of forming a predictable sequence, then branching away. I don't understand. So it's not a pattern, John said. It's not, but that's the whole point. It almost makes sense, but not quite. Charlie paused, thinking for a moment. The tone fluctuations happen so fast that they're only detected by your subconscious. Your mind goes mad trying to make sense of it. It's immediately overwhelmed. It's like the opposite of white noise. You can't follow it, and you can't tune it out. So the animatronics aren't changing shape. We're just being distracted. What's the purpose of that, though? John had turned away from the window, giving up the pretense of ignoring the conversation. To earn our trust, to look more friendly, to look more real. As possibilities stacked up, a grim picture began to form in Charlie's mind. John laughed. To look more real, maybe, but they certainly don't strike me as friendly. To lure kids closer, Charlie continued. The car got quiet. Let's just focus on getting through the night, okay? Clay said from the front seat. We cut to Clay being left the last one awake, and we get some flashbacks to his last fight with his wife Betty, about Clay obsessing over something. Before we can learn what he was obsessing over though, Clay notices the flickering of the streetlights growing ever more rapid. Clay gets out of the car and starts heading to the mound, Charlie waking up and following close behind. However, once they reach the mound, they find them empty, and a piercing scream fills the night. Charlie stopped short a few yards away, struck still, suddenly aware that she was alone. The thing lurched to one side, then stepped out toward her, revealing a slick snout. A wolf's mane ran over the top of its head and down its back. It was stooped over, one arm twisted downward while the other flailed up. Perhaps its control over its limbs was uncertain. It was looking at Charlie, and she met its eyes. They were piercing blue and self-illuminating. Yet while the eyes had a steady light, the rest of the creature was in flux, morphing in a disorientating fashion even as she watched. One moment it was a groomed and agile figure covered in silver hair, the next a tattered metal framework partly covered in a rubbery translucent skin. Its eyes were stark white bulbs. The creature flinched and convulsed, finally settling on its crude metal appearance. Charlie drew in a sharp breath, and the wolf broke its stare. It spasmed alarmingly, double-wheeling over. Its chest split open, folding outward like a horrid metal mouth. The parts made a grinding, abrasive sound. Charlie stifled a scream, rooted to the spot. It lurched again, and something fell from inside it, landing solidly on the ground. The wolf toppled forward beside it, shuddered, and went still. Charlie spends the next day trying to figure out where the twisted animatronics came from, noting that Henry would dismantle anything that didn't work to reuse the pieces. We get a brief flashback to an example of this, where Henry built Charlie a small robotic frog, and when Charlie didn't like it, he took the frog apart, ignoring her pleas to stop hurting the toy frog. Father of the Year. Deciding she doesn't want to put anyone else in danger, Charlie goes to the next point of the twisted animatronics are going to be, finding a small show house where she waits for the animatronics. Meanwhile, John, waiting for Charlie for another date, realizes Charlie's gone to find the animatronics and calls Clay so they can go stop her. The animatronics eventually arrive, Twisted Freddy finding Charlie as she pretends to sleep. His jaw unhinges like a snake, and he slowly swallows Charlie, who eventually gives into the terror and starts screaming. As Twisted Freddy captures her in his stomach, Clay and John arrive, running into the house, finding nothing but trails of dirt and Charlie's abandoned sneakers. An important detail that I'll touch on later is that as Freddy captures Charlie, the book calls out that every part of his face is moving independently, which, if you're familiar with sister location, may sound familiar. Clay and John go to head off the animatronics, Jessica meeting up with them as they do so, who point out that if they already have Charlie, why do the animatronics keep heading towards her dorm? After John suggests they ask the classic animatronics for their help, Clay admits to secretly keeping them instead of allowing them to be demolished alongside the rest of Freddy's. The three go back to Clay's house, finding it to be far messier than when they had saw it the year before. In Betty's absence, discarded mugs, open case files, and empty bottles of whiskey have been left strewn across the living room. When Jessica asks what happened, Clay explains that after what happened at Freddy's the year prior, Betty and Carlton went to stay at her sister's. While she was away, he went back to Freddy's and took the animatronics from Pirate's Cove back to his house where he snuck them into the cellar. Every night since, he's waited until Betty was asleep and went down to keep watch over the animatronics, sometimes trying to talk to them, but finding them seemingly lifeless. Upon finding out, Betty left with Carlton and hasn't come back. Clay, John and Jessica go down to the basement, finding the 5 animatronics tattered and lifeless. Foxy and Bonnie are both described to be slightly withered, with Chica and Freddy only being a little more scuffed than before, and all 4's fur being matted. Interestingly, Golden Freddy's the only one who hadn't sustained any damage whatsoever. The graphic novel changed their design slightly, with the band lacking any withering. This could be in part to their art style, however some details like Chica's bib being torn, a Bonnie missing half his bow tie would have been rather easy to include, which makes me think this was a deliberate choice. They also didn't include Golden Freddy, which makes some of the dialogue a little confusing. In the Silver Eyes, it's revealed that in this continuity, Golden Freddy is possessed by Michael Brooks, one of Charlie's childhood friends. If you go into the Twisted Ones graphic novel not knowing this, however, you would be left to think that regular Freddy is called Michael. If they didn't want to include Golden Freddy in the comic, that's absolutely fine, but I feel they should have altered the dialogue a little bit here just to avoid the confusion. As John asks the animatronics to help them find Charlie, he mentions William Afton, and upon hearing his name, the 5 animatronics spring to life, convulsing and twitching. Fleeing the basement, Jessica, John and Clay barricade the door before hiding behind the desk. As the trio take cover, the animatronics bash down the basement door, leaving the house. Jessica, John and Clay run after them, following their footprints, however they eventually lose their trail. As John and Jessica argue, they hear some rustling ahead and spot a shadowy figure. Halfway across the clearing, a figure stood in the darkness. It was almost featureless and flat, scarcely distinct from the shadows. John squinted, trying to get a hold of the image, to assure himself he was really seeing it. Heavy, black electrical wires stretched above the field like a canopy, but beside the wires, the field was clear. "John, it looks like Freddy? I don't know what it is, John answered cautiously, but I think it wants us to follow. Charlie wakes up inside Twisted Freddy, soul pouring in through the gaps in the suit. After having a brief panic attack, Charlie starts to free her limbs, which have been trapped inside Freddy's. Using the dirt as a cushion to avoid tripping the spring locks, Charlie manages to force open Freddy's chest cavity and through the soil above. Gasping for air, she finds herself in a pizzeria with animatronic heads decorating the walls, some made to look like animals, others like clowns and humans. Wandering through the arcade, Charlie realizes this location was never open to the public, noticing the dust and how new and untouched the arcade cabinets are. Hearing a child's voice, Charlie follows it through a room with a waterfall and into an empty room, bar a singular carousel. Approaching the child, she is hit with a wave of nausea, as the illusion is broken and the child is revealed to be Balloon Boy. Suddenly, Twisted Freddy bursts out from the dirt and after following Charlie into parts and service, attempts to shove Charlie back into his chest cavity. This time, however, Charlie manages to escape his grasp, running out of the parts and service and into John, Jessica and Clay. Realizing the illusion discs are inside the light, Jessica calls for Clay to shoot them, breaking the illusions. As they discuss the illusions, Twisted Freddy bursts through the wall and begins to chase them. Jessica, the only sensible person here, reminds Clay that the Twisted Ones aren't possessed, instructing him to shoot Twisted Freddy, taking him down. Charlie digs the illusion disc out of Freddy, finding one of Clay's bullets lodged in it. They're suddenly cornered by Twisted Wolf and Twisted Bonnie before Springtrap emerges from the shadows. He explains how the animatronics are all linked by a system made to control the show choreography, a system that, since he was trapped and fused into Spring the Bonnie, he can control, essentially making the Twisted animatronics his puppets. He originally intended to have the Twisted animatronics free him from the abandoned Freddy Fazbear's pizza, but Charlie and Jessica beat them to it. As Springtrap gloats, Clay discreetly reloads his gun with his last bullet, shooting Springtrap and calling for Charlie, John and Jessica to run. The four run back through the waterfall party room where they stop, letting Twisted Wolf and Twisted Bonnie wade partway across the river, Charlie now noticing traces of gasoline on the water's surface as Clay throws a light into the river, setting both animatronics ablaze. Spotting Springtrap slinking away, Charlie chases after him, following him into a small fake cave lit by neon blue mushrooms. As she goes to inspect one, Springtrap attempts to take her by surprise and grab her from behind. However, Charlie's able to quickly overpower him, ripping a mushroom cap off the wall and stabbing Springtrap with the spike on the cap's bottom that attached it to the wall. Pushing it deeper in, she demands that he tell her why he kidnapped and killed Sammy. Meanwhile, Clay, Jessica and John are cornered again by the remains of Twisted Bonnie and Twisted Wolf. The wolf leaped, and then fell to the ground, screeching as something knocked it viciously on its face. The figure, invisible in the shadows, grabbed the wolf's feet and yanked it backward, dragging it away from its human prey as it howled, scrabbling at the floor with its claws. It kicked its hind legs, freeing itself, and began its attack again. Jessica screams and John shouted with her, then watched, breathless, as the wolf was caught by its feet again. The thing that held it flipped it onto its back and jumped on top of it. The new predator paused for an instant, meeting their eyes with their silver glow, and Jessica gasped. Foxy, John breathed. As if spurred on by hearing his name, Foxy plunged his hook into the wolf's chest and began to tear at its exposed machinery. The screeches of metal ripping apart metal ground at their ears. Foxy continued to dig furiously, burrowing into the wolf as wires and parts fell from the sky. He snapped his jaws in the air, then tore at the wolf's stomach, wrenching out its insides and flinging them aside with brutal efficiency. The wolf was overpowered, its limbs flailing helplessly before falling heavily to the ground. Behind them came another inhuman scream. John whipped around in time to see the fire-ravaged Bonnie on its stomach, being dragged steadily into the shadows. Its eyes blinked on and off in a panicked, meaningless pattern. It screamed again, as with horrible grinding sound, it was torn to pieces by whatever lurked in the shadows. Pieces of metal and shredded plastic scattered across the floor, skittering out in front of the prone rabbit so that it could see the remnants of its own lower half. It screamed again, anchoring its claws into the tile in a last futile defense, only to be pulled screeching into the dark as though through a grinder. In the shadows, 4 lights glowed. John blinked, realizing they were eyes. He nudged Jessica. "I can see them," he whispered. "Chica and Bonnie. Our Chica and Bonnie." Beside the river, Foxy had torn the wolf's limbs from his body. He leaped from the ravaged torso and took an attack posture towards the large, twisted Freddy, which twitched and flickered for a moment, then lowered its massive head and charged. Foxy leaped, hitting the twisted Freddy's face with full force and knocking it onto its back, then tearing into its head cavity, slashing at what was left of the twisted face with enthusiasm. Something grabbed John and he snapped out of his trance. The twisted Bonnie grabbed him with the arm of exposed metal. The eyes in the dark rose suddenly behind it. The original Bonnie grabbed the torso of the twisted Bonnie and threw it aside to where Chica waited. She grabbed the misshapen rabbit head and wrenched it off in a burst of sparks. John shielded his eyes. When the smoke settled, all that remained was a hollow, burnt corpse of an unidentifiable monster. Bonnie and Chica had vanished into the shadows. The trio attempt to run after Charlie, but are quickly surrounded again, this time by a horde of balloon boys. Just as all seems lost, Freddy Fazbear, top hat at a jaunty angle, charges in, arms are swinging, battering the sea of balloon boys. I'm not making this up, this is FNAF. Back in the cave, Charlie splashes Springtrap's skull into a rock, asking him again why he took Sammy, to which he finds the answers. I didn't take him, I took you. Before he can elaborate, the floor begins to quake as the building starts to collapse. Springtrap takes the chance to escape via a hidden hatch in the floor. Charlie, Jessica, John and Clay flee the building, emerging in the hidden room but John and Charlie had found in Henry's house under Charlie's room. They begin to leave, but Charlie is entranced by a patch of wall. She went to the wall and put her hands on it as she had done before, but this time the concrete was warm and somehow smooth despite the rough finish. I have to get inside. For a moment she felt like she was in two places at once, here inside the little room and on the other side of the wall, desperate to get through. She drew back suddenly, taking her hands off the wall as if burned. The illusion flickered, then died altogether. The concrete wall was made of metal, and at the centre was a door. Charlie stared, blank with shock. This is the door. She'd been drawing it without knowing what it was, approximating over and over something she had never seen. She stepped forward again, and put her hands on the surface. It was still warm. She pressed her cheek against it. Are you in there? She called softly. I have to get you out. Her heart was pounding, blood rushing in her ears so loudly she could scarcely hear anything else. Charlie! Charlie! John and Jessica were both calling her from outside, but their voices seemed as distant as memory. She stood, not taking her hands from the metal, but tracing her fingers along it. It felt like letting go for even an instant would cause her pain. She brought her hands to the crack in the wall. It had no handle, no knob, and no hinges, just an outline. And now she ran her thumb up and down the side of it, trying to find a trip, some trick that would make the door open and let her through. She heard John climb back inside and slowly approach her, keeping his distance as though he might scare her away. Charlie, if you don't get out of it, you'll die. Whatever's behind that door, it can't give you back your family. You still have us. Charlie looked at John. His eyes were wide and frightened. She took a small step toward him. We've lost enough. Please, don't make me lose you too, John pleaded. Charlie stared at the ceiling as it trembled. Clouds of smoke were pouring out of the corridor they'd come from. John coughed heavily. He was choking. She looked at him. He was terrified, unwilling to draw closer than he already was. She turned again, and the world around her faded. She couldn't hear John behind her, or the smell of the smoke filling the air. She laid her hand flat against the wall. A heartbeat. I feel a heartbeat. Though she made no intentional movement, her body turned to the side. She tensed, committing to remain where she stood, without ever making the decision. Something began to hiss, the steady, gentle sound of air being released. From the base of the door came a rhythmic clicking. Charlie closed her eyes. Charlie! John grabbed her and turned her forcefully toward him, shaking her out of her stupor. Look at me, I'm not leaving you here. I have to stay. No, you have to come with us, he cried. You have to come with me. No, Charlie felt her voice trail off. She was losing strength. I love you, John said. Charlie's eyes stopped drifting. She fixed them on him. I'm taking you with me, right now. He grabbed her hand roughly. He was strong enough to pull her away by force, she knew, but he was waiting for her to acknowledge him. She looked into his eyes, trying to let them bring her back. It felt like trying to awaken from a dream. John's gaze was an anchor, and she held it, letting him keep her steady, draw her back to him. Okay, she said quietly. As Charlie starts to follow John out, Twisted Freddy, now missing his legs and an arm, with most of his outer casing melted off revealing the metal plates and wiring beneath, grabs her and yanks her back, starting to stuff Charlie into his stomach. Jessica, John and Clay desperately try to pry Freddy open, his plates starting to seal Charlie in, with one of Charlie's arms free that John held onto. The Springlocks, they'll kill me if you touch the wrong thing. But if we don't get you out, you'll die anyway, Jessica shouted. Charlie saw for the first time that the mouth wasn't finished closing. It was layered somehow, and metal plates began folding over her like petals of a horrid flower. John started to stand, but Charlie tightened her hand around his. Don't let go of me, she cried, panicked. He dropped back to his knees and pulled her hand to his chest. She stared at him, even as the metal plates closed over her, threatening to seal her off. Jessica tried to jam them delicately, without setting off the springlocks. Jessica continued holding Charlie's hand, which had gone limp. Charlie! Jessica cried. Charlie's hand closed over hers again, and Jessica gasped with relief. John, Clay, she's okay, hurry! Charlie, can you hear me? It's Jessica. There was no sound from inside Freddy's sealed chest, but Charlie held on tightly to Jessica's hand as the others grimly worked to free her. Suddenly, a single high-pitched click reverberated through the air. John and Clay froze, the hand still hovering above Freddy's chest. For a moment, the air stood still, then the metal body convulsed violently. It launched itself off the ground, and a ghastly crunch of metal pierced the air. All three pulled back instinctively. Clay and John jumped away from the thing, and Jessica scrambled backward, dropping Charlie's hand. The suit fell again and was still. The arm was splayed on the ground at an awkward angle. The room was silent. Charlie? John said softly. Then his face went white. He ran to the place where her arm was exposed, falling hard on his knees and grabbed her hand in both of his own. It was limp. John turned it over and tapped her palm with his fingers. Charlie? Charlie! John, Jessica said very quietly. The blood. He looked up at her, confused, still holding on to Charlie. Then something wet dripped onto his hand. There was blood running out of the suit and down Charlie's arm. Her skin was slick and red, except the hand he held. He watched, unable to look away, as it dripped steadily from the suit, pooling onto the ground, and began to seep into his jeans. Police officers arrive, Clay having radioed them, and they start dragging John away from Charlie's corpse, still trapped inside Twisted Freddy. He manages to break free of the officer's grasp, running back to the collapsing house before stopping in his tracks as he sees a dark-haired woman kneeling beside Twisted Freddy, holding Charlie's lifeless hand, meeting John's gaze as the house collapses around her. Sometime later, Jessica and John are waiting for Marla in a diner, mourning Charlie's death. Artie, one of Charlie's classmates, don't worry, he's useless to the plot and does not aid anyone's character development, he's just a waste of pages. Don't worry about it. Arrives just before Marla, so John and Jessica have to try and tell Marla how Charlie died without mentioning Afternoon Freddy's. Thinking back to the collapsing building, John realizes that it was Charlie's Aunt Jen who had been kneeling next to Charlie. Jessica gasps and he turned back to the table warily. What, Jessica? John asks. Her nervous energy was beginning to exhaust him. She didn't answer, but gave him an incredulous look and turned back to the window. Marla leaned past John, craning her neck to see. Reluctantly, he looked too, letting his eyes focus for the first time on the parking lot outside the window, and not the pane of the glass itself. It was a car. The woman driving killed the engine and got out. She was slim and tall, with long straight brown hair that glistened in the sun. She was wearing a bright red knee-length dress with black combat boots, and she strode purposefully toward the diner. They all watched motionless, as if the slightest sound might rupture the illusion and send her away. The woman was almost at the door. Artie said at first, "Charlie?" Marla shook her head. She leaped up and turned, calling from the seat, "Charlie!" She ran for the door, and Jessica was quick on her heels, crying out after her. They rushed to the doorway to meet her just as she walked in. John stayed where he was, craning his neck to see the door. Artie seemed confused, his mouth opened slightly, and his brow furrowed. John watched for a steady moment, then turned away decisively, facing across the table with a grave expression. He didn't speak until Artie met his gaze. "That's not Charlie." So what from that can we actually apply to the games? A large amount of the book, like the previous installment in the series, is incompatible with the games. Well, whilst the plot itself isn't compatible with the games, the technology and the characterization are. As you likely noticed throughout the summary, the twisted animatronics seem to be a hybrid of the fun times from Sister Location and FNAF 4's Nightmare Animatronics. The animatronics having smooth segmented faces with plates that can move independently like the fun times, whilst appearing to have talons, sharp teeth and stomach mouths like the nightmares whilst their discs are active. This is most clear in some of the promotional art of Twisted Foxy and Twisted Chica. Despite her only being mentioned once whilst Charlie watches over Twisted Freddy's mound in Chapter 8 as potentially being buried nearby, she never actually existed. I think Scott and Kira only mentioned the possibility of a Twisted Chica as to line up closer to the nightmares, the core 4, and a 5th mysterious animatronic that glitches between two forms. And whilst the final illustration for Twisted Foxy appears more organic and covered in barnacles, his concept arts bore a striking resemblance to Nightmare Foxy, with one of their previous drafts of the final teaser being straight up Nightmare Foxy. Furthermore, the book's cover is Nightmare on a glitching blue background, but if there's one takeaway from this book, appearances are deceiving. Whilst they look like the Nightmare Animatronics to Charlie and their friends whilst on the attack, they act more like the fun times, capturing and killing their victims in their stomach hatches, just like we see on Funtime Freddy's blueprints, and just like how Circus Baby killed Afton's daughter. I don't think it was coincidence that Scott chose Freddy to be the main antagonist, and for Freddy to shove Charlie in his stomach cavity not once, not twice, but 3 times. I think it's clear that the Twisted Animatronics are the Nobles versions of the Nightmare Animatronics. But then, does that mean the fun times and the nightmares are one and the same? After all, as you said, the Twisted Animatronics are a combination of the two. Well, I don't think it's that cut and dry. I think they likely share some technology. After all, both the Funtime blueprint and Sister Location's opening cutscene credit Afton as their creator, and according to the Breaker Room map, the nightmares are physical animatronics. Note each grey square representing where an animatronic should be. Speaking of Afton's creations, during the Mason section of Sister Location Night 3, a small round disc can be found in Funtime Freddy's chest cavity. Now I hear you, Hand Unit calls this a power module, but Hand Unit is a filthy liar. And what can be heard throughout this whole section are high-pitched ringing, just like the one that illusion discs emit. But Jaffa, if the fun times have illusion discs, then why don't they look like the Nightmare or Twisted Animatronics? Well, as Charlie said, you were a little kid and you saw the cute commercials and saw the posters and toys and all that stuff, then I think that's what they would have looked like. Charlie and the gang saw the Springlock victims before they saw what the animatronics looked like, fearing what kind of animatronic could have done this. Not to mention, they had seen how terrifying the Freddy's animatronics can be the year before. If Mike was already afraid of the animatronics, then they would look like the nightmares. In fact, they could be why the Nightmare animatronics look the way they do. Mike watched Fredbear bite down on his brother's skull, and now when the illusion disc is active, he sees Fredbear having a ginormous mouth with bloody teeth. The only question is then, what are the Nightmare animatronics for? Why do they have illusion discs? Well, look at the name of FNAF 4's rooms. Observation Room 1 and Observation Room 2. If I had to guess, this is likely so William Afton can test the effects of the illusion discs. As for why William would do this, I don't know, villain's got a villain I guess. But enough about why this room exists. How does it connect to the Twisted ones? We know from the Breaker Room map that the Sister Location bunker and the FNAF 4 house, or Observation Rooms 1 and 2, are connected. Literally, you can see on the map what seems to be either vents or corridors connecting the plush trap chaser hallway, the FNAF 4 bedroom, and the minigame house to the Sister Location bunker, just like Henry's house at the underground location. If you look closely at the Breaker Room map, the observation rooms are all a light grey whilst the rental is in white, almost as if they're at different levels. The observation rooms above ground, while the rental down below the surface. The The bunker and the underground pizzeria even share similar decor. The Twisted Ones subscribe to the pizzeria to have animatronic heads of various human, clown and animal characters. Meanwhile, Persistent Location's primary control module has a clown mask on the wall, which can occasionally be replaced with Lolbit's head. And whilst they're admittedly next to the wall, not actually mounted to it, there's 3 robotic human heads. It seems that just as Henry's house was above the underground pizzeria in the novels, the FNAF 4 house is above the underground rental, and seemingly owned by the other Fazbear founder, William Afton. But let's not get bogged down by the minutiae of it all. It's all good and well knowing the fun times contain illusion discs, and FNAF 4 was essentially a testing ground for said illusion technology, but what does that mean for the FNAF lore? Apart from the Nightmare animatronics originally being made to test the illusion discs made by William Afton, most of what we've learned from the Twisted Ones explains how the technology is working, at least on a base level. Why does Springtrap abandon his hunt to go after the audio lures in FNAF 3? Because he's linked to the animatronic system, and as Phone Guy said in FNAF 2,
so while our engineers don't really have an explanation for this, the working theory is that the robots were never given a proper night mode. So when it gets quiet, they think they're in the wrong room. So then they go try to find where the people are, and in this case, that's your office.
Sure, Springtrap said he controls the system, and I think he definitely can manipulate it somehow. And this could be a books versus game difference, but remember, he's boasting in this scene. He's gloating about how he's stronger and smarter than ever, a greater roboticist than Henry could ever have hoped to be. He's lauding the fact that Charlie and Jessica had been foolish enough to do his bidding without him even trying to trick them. Why would he admit that his suit has to obey the system just as much as the other animatronics? The only difference is that he has the autonomy to use the system to his advantage and essentially mind control the animatronics connected to the same choreography system as him. But let me know in the comments, do you agree the Nightmare animatronics were an early test of the illusion disc? Was the entirety of FNAF 4 real? Personally, I stand by FNAF 4's nighttime gameplay being a dream had by Michael Afton, post FNAF 1 due to animatronics pathing matching their classics in FNAF 1, as well as the Phone Guy Easter egg, but I think they were based on real experiences from observation rooms 1 and 2. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing, it helps me out a lot and keeps you up to date with all my theories. Apologies for the hiatus, these book theories always take a lot longer, but hopefully FNAF 6 Simplified shouldn't take quite as long. Until then though, good bit for now.